Uh, Good morning. I wanted to thank Jurgis, the program committee, members of the on-site team, and to say the only disappointment is that we can't be together in Riga. And that's too bad, because Riga is a very beautiful and wonderful place with the Freedom Memorial, the beautiful architecture of Eisenstein, and very interesting food and drink, such as I hope someday that I can return and try this stuff again for those. And I also wanted to congratulate you on winning the gold medal in men's 3-on-3 basketball, although I point out that the U.S. women won as well. So we're together. Yeah. Now on to Steve Franconeri. Steve received his undergraduate degree from Rutgers State University of New Jersey. I believed he worked with, I can't say, Pilishin. He then went on to work at Harvard, and the sort of interdisciplinary and collaborative nature of the training at Harvard, which, you know, he was trained in the Vision Lab. He's not tied to any one particular person, but worked closely with several people. And this collaborative model that he learned there really continues now that he's at Northwestern and a leader in the field. He's a professor of psychology and director of the cognitive program, cognitive science program. And he's also the recipient of the Early Career Award of the Psychonomic Society. Steve studies the sources and causes of limits in visual perception and visual working memory. He has a wonderfully elegant approach to help make the complex simple, but also, as you'll see, to realize that some of the things that we think are so simple, such as perceiving the height of a bar chart, are actually, you know, tapping into complex human visual sources. And he brings this out very, very clearly. He's very gifted in communication, very much looking for his. It's strange to use the word talk when talking about Steve, because all of his talks are very visual in nature, consistent with the whole program. He's helped us to understand why there's a limit on how many things we can see, or if there is a fixed limit, and understanding the complexities of how information is combined or not to challenge how much we can see and remember. And he's augmented that with research on education and communication, and even something as simple as perceiving, for example, this is a bar graph for children, and they demonstrated how many like chocolate cake, yellow cake, marble cake, and white cake. And it seems like very easy questions. You know, what's the favorite cake? Well, you'll see that how we perceive this is actually fascinating process that requires that we think about relations, that we shift our eyes between the bars, and that our brain seems to cue into those movements and calculate the relations. Relations have to be calculated is one of the fundamental lessons of Steve's work. So without further ado, I give you my colleague and friend to the whole field, Steve Franconeri.
Thank you so much, David, for that very kind introduction. And I would love to also echo your thanks to the organizing committee for everyone for putting this together. David, I might ask that you stop sharing your screen, because I can't do it until that. Thank you very much. All right. And you should see some pictures of things. Thumbs up. All right. So that's a fantastic introduction, David. So I was raised in grad school studying vision in general, studying the natural world, faces, scenes, visual memory, etc., for the natural world. And these days I study vision in artificial worlds, maps, graphs, and diagrams, and also try to evangelize for more people in vision to be studying these worlds, because they are so important. I will start with this object. This is going to be my friend throughout the presentation today, because it's going to be a good model for all of the problems that I want to attack. because I don't understand it. I never took, my last chemistry, to be honest, was in 8th grade. I never took any college chemistry. This isn't meaningful to me. I look at this and I see a bunch of different colors. I see some structure. I know that there's a carbon ring in there. I know that there's methyl groups on the side. The things are called that. I could rattle off the atomic identities for these things just because I've memorized them, but I don't really get it. I don't really have a lot of experience with this kind of diagram. Yet there's a lot of information that I can pull from this diagram. I can look at it, and then I can look at my cool coffee mug that has a caffeine molecule on it, and I can notice that these are actually the same. It took me a second because one is actually upside down relative to the other. So I can look at this caffeine molecule on the coffee mug, and I can say that's the top, and then I can say this is the top for the other one. It's just upside down. So I can set a reference frame for this object, even though I'm not familiar with it. I could also, in theory, mentally rotate this object so that the reference frames for these two things are the same. That was a really difficult mental rotation operation. What we'll show in a little bit is that nobody could have done what I just did, unless you have a ton of experience in chemistry, but I could still do it to some degree. I can also look at this molecule now and notice that the spatial structure of these blue things, these nitrogen atoms, are the same as the spatial layout as the nitrogen atoms on my mug. And I could notice the same thing for these little oxygen atoms. So I can pop through and notice the spatial structure of arbitrary atomic identities. I could then rotate it back, and maybe I can pull out spatial relationships. Hey, I don't know what this thing is, but I can still tell that that little red thing is to the right of that black atom. So I can pull out arbitrary spatial relationships from this thing. Hey, there's one more thing I can do. If I'm in a classroom and I'm learning that these things are called methyl groups and they're all the same, and my instructor gives me this animation where all the little methyl groups rise to the top so I can see the similarity, I can see that those three things on the top of the screen are the same as the ones that were attached to the molecule a moment ago. So I can track objects over space and time. There's a lot of stuff that I just did, even though I don't have experience with this particular kind of diagram. What I want to argue today is that all those tricks that we all just did, even if we're not experts, might arise from a system that we've adapted. We have this system called an attentional priority map. It's more parietal frontal eye fields. We've talked a lot about hippocampus and cerebellum this week, but these are going to be more parietal systems where you can pay attention to things. You can get a better signal to noise ratio right now. I can pay attention to what Guntis is doing or what David is doing at the moment, right, by moving my eyes or my attention around, and that's really helpful. But I want to argue that that priority map is a system that we've adapted to actually recover these arbitrary and flexible spatial structures in the world. I want to argue that the way that you pick out the spatial layout of the blue things or the red things is by turning up the gain on blue and just having the blue be the only thing in the world for one perceptual instant, and then turning up the gain on red and having the red be the only thing in your perceptual world for an instant. That's the way that you pick out that structure. I want to argue that by paying attention to one part of an object, that helps set the reference frame. That makes it the front or the top of the object, and changing where you pay attention should change your reference frame. And that picking out one part of an object can also help you mentally rotate. If you wanted to take this molecule and turn it, that the way that most people seem to do it is they pick out one piece of the object and they use that as sort of a handle to turn the object around. Same system could be used to help you see objects as the same over space and time. If I take that little methyl group on the lower left and I move it up, I'll argue that the way that you see that as the same thing it was before is that you tracked it with your attention over time. And that's what makes you see it as the same thing over space and time. Finally, I want to argue that this system could be the way it could be used to help us extract spatial relationships from the world. You could know that the red thing is to the right of the carbon, the black one, by moving your attention from the black to the red, noticing that you move to the right, and that's how you know that the red thing is on the right. So hopefully we'll convince you that these are all plausible ways that we could be adapting our attentional system to be extracting structure in space in a really flexible way in the visual world. So please feel free to pop comment questions in the chat anytime or interrupt me, and happy to pause and take questions as we go and make this interactive. I'll start with the attentional priority map. I mentioned that we have this parietal, slightly frontal eye field system that helps us pay attention to certain places in the world. What does that mean? Let me give you a classic demo from the visual attention literature, where I'm going to give you a bunch of just letters in a display. You feel like you're recognizing all of these letters at the same time, like you're seeing each one. Oh, there's definitely an S, there's definitely a G, but tons of work from the visual attention world shows that you're actually seeing these as one big statistical mass right now. There's letter stuff on the screen, and that unless you pay attention individually to any one of these letters, you're just seeing letter stuff. You're saying, come on, I see all those letters crisply and clearly, they're all there. Well, no, that's because when you think about it, you go and you attend to it, and then you check, and then of course it's clear. It's like the illusion that the light in your fridge is always on, right? It's always there when you open it, so you think it's always on. It's the same thing here. And there's lots of demos that can show this, that you're not actually processing all these letters at the same time. So if you think you're doing that, then I'm going to change one of them. It's an H now, but what was it a second ago? Yeah, that's a D now, but what was it a second ago? I know that's a U now, but what was it a second ago? I know that's an M now, but what was it a second ago? I know that's a V now, but what was it a second ago? We could literally do this all day. And maybe you'll get like 1 out of 8 because you happen to be paying attention to that one, but you can't do it for everything. If you do deploy your attention to one of the objects, there you go. Now you're going to get it, no problem, because you're able to have a signal to noise ratio for that one letter where you're isolating that and you're relatively inhibiting the rest. You're doing this all the time. You do it so fast, several times per second, that you don't even realize that you're doing it. I'll give you a much simpler display. Right now you're seeing A's and B's, but they're all mushing together in your brain. And when you see the A or the B clearly, what you're doing is you're putting a little attentional spotlight on that one location. And that's selectively amplifying that information from the A, and it's selectively inhibiting the rest of the stuff on the screen. And then when you see the B clearly, you're moving your attentional spotlight to the B, and it's selectively inhibiting the rest of the stuff. And that's why you see those individual letters clearly. Okay, I'm going to prevent you from doing this. I'm going to trick your visual system a little bit, and I'm going to keep your attentional spotlight big. The way I'm going to do that is I'm going to move these letters off to the periphery, and you can't have a small spotlight in the periphery. You have to have a big one. These are your possible attentional spotlights, like those folks on the bottom. They went and measured them all. They get bigger when it's in the periphery. So I'm going to take these letters and I'm going to shove them out to the periphery. Keep your eyes on the slash and the little slash in the center, and then have the letters in your peripheral vision. I bet you feel that they look fuzzy now, like the A's and the B's are kind of ghostly, and they're kind of like the A kind of turns into a B for a moment. They're like kind of flickering in their identities. It gets a little weird. That's not because you can't see clearly in the periphery. Because if I put just A's on the other side, you can see them perfectly clearly. It's not an acuity issue. They're all mushing together because you're seeing A's and B's at the same time. So this is what attention does. It allows you to be able to get pure, clean signal from subsets of the visual world at a time. You can't do that at the moment on the left, but it doesn't matter. If you've got A, and A, that's fine. You still see the A's clearly. But on the right, I'm forcing you now to have the A's and the B's all get vacuumed into your visual system at once, and they fight with each other. You can feel the bickering on the right side because you can't pick them off. One more trick that your visual system has available: if I take these letters on the right, still keep your eyes in the center, and I now make them different colors so that the A's are red and the B's are blue, you can easily tell the difference, but more easily at least tell the difference. That's because you can turn up the gain in your visual system, not just on a location, but you can turn up the gain on red or on blue. So you've got a little histogram somewhere of, here's all the colors that are available. Let's just pretend it's the rainbow for the moment: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. And you can turn up the gain on red. And what that does on the display on the right is it actually makes the A's pop out, and it makes the B's fade back because they're not red, they're blue. And then you can change that switch in your head to, let's say, blue. And then at that one perceptual moment, the B's will be popping out and the A's will be popping back. So these are two tools that your visual system has available to attempt to filter in the world, to amplify some parts of the world while inhibiting other parts of the world. And no, Sarah, there was not a gorilla, but I can show you later on. This is exactly why the gorilla works. You asked me during the question period, I have an actual animation that shows how this works. For the gorilla, you're paying attention to the teams in white shirts playing basketball, and you're inhibiting the ones in black shirts. And then the gorilla who's wearing a dark suit walks by and you're inhibiting it, and you literally don't see the gorilla. If you pay attention to the team in the dark shirts, you do see the gorilla, because that does enter the filter. That's exactly the mechanism. Thanks for bringing that up. Dan Simons was my advisor, so they did the gorilla. I came the year after they did all the gorilla stuff to grad school. Okay, so that's attention. That's the way that attention is typically thought of. It gives you this signal to noise boost by amplifying what's relevant and inhibiting what's not. And again, what I want to argue is that we've adapted this system to be able to give you all the goodies on the corners of the screen right now. First goodie, similarity grouping. It allows you to pull out the spatial layout of the blue things or the red things in the screen. This is one of the core things that we do in maps, graphs, and diagrams. We want to be able to see what's the distributions of states with high listing prices for sales or whatever is going on in that map. Okay, the green stuff seems to be in the middle, the red seems to be distributed, etc. You're going through and pulling out the spatial structure of those different colors. On the graph on the bottom, same deal. What's going on with those orange dots versus those blue dots? So how do we pull out this arbitrary spatial structure? We do it all the time in the natural world. Here we go. I'm going to have some fruit, and I can notice that these two are the same, and these two are the same. I can look at a weather map, and I can notice that these wind patterns are the same in orientation. These are the same in orientation. I can look at my bowl of cereal, and I can notice that all these diamond shapes are the same. So this grouping can operate over color, luminance, orientation, motion direction, etc. And they're powerful visual cues for grouping. What I want to claim, though, is that the way that this is happening, the way that you are getting these groupings is just by turning up the gain on red or on blue, or turning up the gain on circles versus diamonds somewhere in your visual system. So you're sort of filtering like this at one perceptual moment, and you're seeing that the blue makes these vertical columns. Without doing this filtering operation, you don't actually have this spatial structure that these things are organized into columns. You have to do this filtering operation. This should sound super crazy. You should look at a display like this and say, Steve, you're nuts. I see all 6 of these things grouped at the same time. And I'm going to say, no, you're actually only getting one at a time. Actually, when you see the blue grouped, you could turn up the gain on blue, and that's the only one you've got. And then you turn up the gain on green, and that's the only one you got. And you got this illusion of detail where you feel like all 6 are there at the same time, just because every time you check, it's there. Again, it's like that light in your fridge. Every time you open the door, the fridge light is on, so you feel like it's always there. And this would have to be the same kind of illusion. Okay, well, let's test it. Let's do a test. You think you can see all 6 of these at the same time. I'm going to claim you're only getting one at a time. Let's give it some sort of empirical test. Let me make it simpler, first of all. I'm going to just get rid of, we don't need 6 for grouping, just 2 is enough, right? There's groups of pairs that's simpler. And let's make it a little simpler. I'm going to break one of these groups in a second. I'm going to replace the green with the blue, and I'm going to see if you can tell if one of the groups are messed up. I'm a vision scientist, so I'm obsessed with everything being equally distant from the fovea, so I will arrange it like this. And I'm going to test it. I'm going to say, hey, is one thing on the display broken or not? And all I'm going to claim is that if I put more things on the display, more colors, more groups, you should have to turn more knobs, and it should take more time. So let's arrange it as this, the equally distant. And then for control reasons, you'll see in a minute, I'm going to make them squares, so it's a little cleaner. And then I'm going to ask you, which one of these is broken? Okay, so you can play the home game on this one. Number 1, that's broken, right? 6, let's see, 3, you get the idea. So I'm going to claim that it's going to have to take you more time, more colors you add, it's going to take you linearly more time to turn that many knobs. And the data show, here's the number of pairs I have on the screen, the number of time it took you to respond, and as predicted, there you go. You get an increase, and the increase here is about commensurate with the estimates of how long it takes people to turn these knobs in a sequence in their visual system. Reviewer 3 maybe is on the line and is saying, yeah, it gets slower, but you're adding more junk to the screen. There's more clutter. There's more stuff there. Can you control for that somehow? Okay, sure. What we're going to do is we're going to take these groups, and we're going to remove the need to group them to be able to do this test. We're just going to squish them together. And once you squish them together, see how number 1 now has this juicy color contrast edge that is now popping out? Your visual system eats those for breakfast. You can detect those really easily. And so now you should be able to pick these out really quickly. Display complexity, blah, blah, number of colors on the screen is all going to be the same, but we're just giving you this little dirty trick that you can use to pick out the one that is broken. So you'd say 1, 2, 2, 1, 6. I think you'll agree this is super easy now, even though we've controlled for all those complexities, and now the data look like this. It goes totally flat. So there's really something about connecting things that are disconnected and grouping them together that seems to be driving this increase in set size. And This could be giving us the flexible ability in any map, graph, diagram, or just grouping in the natural world. You know, these things are the same color behind me. These things are the same color behind me. You could be turning up the gain in this case on these dark colors, and that's what lets you see this spatial layout of the objects of the same color behind me. Could be the same thing for shape. You know, to your visual system, turning up the gain on diamondiness is just like turning up the gain on color. You know, it's just another feature space that it has organized somehow. Luminance, etc. There's even an explanation for common fate based on this, where you're turning up the gain on a motion direction. If you're curious about that, I can show you what that experiment looks like. Just ask me during the question period. I'll omit that for now. But getting back to maps, graphs, and diagrams, what the prediction is that if on the map on the top, you're only getting one group at a time. You can only get the red states or the green states or the yellow states at one moment. And asking people to do some operation where they have to compare the spatial distribution of the red states to the green states, etc., should rely a lot on memory. And the more groups, the more colors you have to flip through to do this should rely more and more on memory. And that task is going to get increasingly hard. On the graph on the bottom, you could imagine that getting the global layout of all of these marks on the scatter plot is pretty easy. But as soon as you have to decide something like, what's the between group variation? Okay, now I've got to be able to see where's the mean of the blue ones, where's the mean of the orange ones, where's the mean of the red ones. That kind of operation should be tough. So these are cases where now we can go back to the maps, graphs, diagrams, and data visualizations world and see if there's ways of redesigning displays to make tasks like that easier. And you know what, actually some of the researchers in the data visualization world have already kind of figured this out intuitively without necessarily knowing the mechanism. But there's applications like this where you have a map and let's say the purple boxes are the Italian restaurants and then the brown boxes are the French restaurants, and you want to know where's Little Italy and where's Little Paris and things like that. They found that that's actually really hard. Color grouping isn't really powerful here. And what you have to do in these situations is to add grouping by connectivity and common region and grouping cues that are known to be more powerful. And they figured this out because they're good designers. But I think we can explain a bit of the mechanism of why these kinds of grouping cues can work more powerfully in visualizations and diagrams like this. So that's one case. That's similarity grouping. Turning up the gain on red or on blue can give you the spatial structure of those atoms. Here's another example, structural change. First one's going to be marking a reference frame. How do I know that this object is, how do I see this object as being right side up or upside down? For objects, you know, they do have a direction to them. This guy's looking to the left. This remote's facing to the left. This skateboarder's going to the right. These they have semantics to them, right? The eyes are on the left. I put some waves. I'm cheating here. What about objects that don't naturally have those sort of long-term memory semantics to them? How about this one? This one, you know, does this face up or toward you or to the right or what? Put your eyes on the letter A. Now it's kind of facing up. It feels like a tissue box where I would pull from the top. Put your eyes on B. Now it's facing toward you. It's like an alarm clock with a face on the front. Put your eyes on C. Now it's kind of facing to the right. It looks like it's a video camera that's pointing to the right. What's the front of this cheese grater? If you want to make triangular cheese, then it seems to be facing to the left. If you want to make circular cheese, I know that's not how cheese works. If you want to make circular cheese, then it's kind of facing to the right. How about this table? Where's the head of this table? King Arthur and that, those British legends had a round table so that nobody was the boss. No, wherever King Arthur's sitting, that's the head of the table, right? It's like wherever the eyes and the attention are, that becomes the head of the table. My favorite example of all time, I wish I were Canadian after seeing this because I've never eaten Shreddies, but apparently this is a cereal in Canada. I laughed just way too hard when I first saw this, and I think about this way too often, that they had an actual cereal box where it was a combo of both square and diamond shapes in there, and you had to vote for which was your favorite shape. It's real. Thank you, Mary. Heather. Sorry. I want to go to Canada just to buy this box. This is spectacular. But yeah, it's so real. I mean, it took me a few seconds when I first looked at this to realize that they're the same shape. It's just a reference frame change. It's a really powerful effect. So we want to know whether where you put your attention in these cases has some influence on these reference frames about what you think of as the front or the top of the main axis of an object. So if we're going to test this, we need something where we really objectively have a reference frame switch where we can see something as pointing one way or the other. So we're going to use this famous example of the Necker cube. You can see this thing pointing left or right. You can see it in either of two ways. And we're going to see is if you see it pointing left, does your attention tend to go on the left, or your eyes? If you see it pointing right, do your eyes or your attention tend to go to the right? We're not actually going to look at eye movements in this one. We're just going to use attention. We're going to track your attention. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to steal a technique from the electrophysiological literature where you stick an electrode cap on someone's head. And if they're paying attention to the stuff on the left, you get more negativity on the opposite side of the head. And if they're paying attention to the stuff on the right, you get more negativity on this side. So it's a bad spatial resolution. It's just left versus right, but great temporal resolution. And the folks on the bottom left have pioneered this technique. And they mostly use it for those typical signal to noise ratio kinds of tests, like, hey, differentiate your A's from your B's. We're going to steal it and use it for these sorts of structure tasks and see if you see this thing as having the front on the left, does your attention tend to go there? And if you see it as the front on the right, does your attention tend to go there? So we're going to put people in front of this Necker cube. The screen doesn't change. It's just that same cube. And we're going to tell them, you got 2 seconds. What I want you to do is to see, in this case, the front coming this way, and then I want you to see the front coming this way. And, you know, press a button if you did it correctly, or else we throw out the trial if you couldn't do it. And what we find is that if you use this technique where you can track attention shifts left and right, so first of all, you're supposed to see back front, and then you're supposed to see front back, and there's a little beep that tells you when you're supposed to switch. And what you find from this electrophysiological correlate of attention is that people will move their attention systematically to the front and systematically to the back. So it's, the position of where attention is strongly correlated with which side you see as the front. Maybe this is something about instructions. People think they know that they're supposed to see that as the front and see that. And so they're kind of thinking, okay, the right is the front. You know, they're just saying that in their head. And so we wanted to have something a little more natural where you just sit there and you just let this thing naturally oscillate. If you sit there and stare at this thing, at one moment you'll see it like this, and then you'll see it like this. You can just space out, it'll just oscillate. We said, here's 2 buttons. If you see it like this, press this button. If you see it like this, press this button. And then we took the data and sliced it up like that, so that we can see all where your attention was when you pressed button A versus button B. And then we're going to take the data and we're going to fold it over so that we're going to have attention toward the front. And this is what you get. So when you press the button and say, I saw this side is the front, remember this is folded over, so it's both at the same time. 800 milliseconds before you press that button, your attention was already wandering over to that side. So showing, again, a strong correlation with a temporal precedence that your attention is helping you see that part as the front. You're still wondering, you know, this is correlational evidence, it's not causal. Maybe people begin to have some other mechanism pull that surface to the front, and then they start looking, you know, moving their attention there because it's coming to the front. So how do you dissociate that? Well, now you do experiments where you have flashy cues, and you just have the Necker cube, and you go hoo-hoo or hoo, you know, over here, and then that makes it the front. So that's another. I'm not going to show you the data from that, but there's some causal evidence that that your attention is driving this relationship. So that's a little bit on setting reference frames. Wherever you have your attention seems to correspond with the top or the front of an object, and it may have an actual causal role in setting that reference frame. Next is mental rotation. What if I want to take this object and turn it and look and think and actually imagine it being upside down? I want to claim that having your attention on a certain spot and then moving it around seems to be crucial to having that mental rotation operation unfold. In order to show you this, first of all, I'm going to do a quick detour. Just check out this display. This will be relevant in a minute, I promise. Look at this. Ooh, look at that. It's on a turning table. That red raspberry or strawberry, that yellow, is that like mustard or chamomile? That is the weirdest ice cream flavor I've ever seen. Okay, this will be relevant in a few minutes, I promise. I'm going to get back to diagrams. I promise I'll come back to that in a couple minutes because I just played a trick on you. These should look familiar if you've ever taken organic chemistry. I have not. I have worked in this area a good bit in the last few years, and so I've done a lot of Khan Academy to become a fake organic chemist. But these are 2 molecules where if you get to organic chemistry, all of a sudden the fail rate for that class compared to Chemistry 101 is much higher because suddenly you have to start thinking in 3D, mentally rotating things. This is a really simple example of 2 molecules that are not the same, but students will have trouble and they'll think they're the same. The individual identities are the same. The black wedges are those Fs, they're coming out at you. And then the dashed bits with the BR, those are going back behind the screen. And you cannot line these two up. These are going to be stereoisomers of each other. If you tried to actually superimpose them, you could not do it. They're different molecules in really important ways. And students have a heck of a time figuring this out because it's tough for them to mentally rotate. Now, people have taken the flavor of the structures that are in these molecules and tried to test in more abstract stimuli like these, how well people can do these rotations. And I'm really inspired by this work from the 70s where they look at eye movements. And if I just demonstrate what the eye movements look like, if you were to compare these two, this is what their data look like. People look like this and like this and like this and like this, and it's all over the place. And these authors go into these really in-depth models where they try to figure out, well, this eye movement, this seems like a double check, and this one seems like it's matching this part to that part, and then this one seems like it's checking the holistic structure, and they do an amazing job as one could do from these really complex set of eye movements to be able to figure out what are the sub-steps of what is the capacity of one of these little comparisons from one to the other, and then how does that build up into a bigger process. I can't do all that. That's too tough. I want to just isolate what is the capacity of one comparison. If you try to pull something from one of these shapes and then you try to look at the other shape, what is the maximum amount of information that you can compare at a given moment? So not this level of complexity. We're gonna find out what's the maximum you can do in a single shot. So going back to our regular molecule for a second, we're gonna turn this into a simple visual stimulus. I'm going to do something that's going to hurt anybody with chemistry expertise. I apologize for what I'm about to do. You're going to hear a literal crack. There you go. I just took all the bond angles and I just broke them. If Mike Stife sees me do this, he wants to strangle me. This like hurts his eyes when I do this, our chemistry collaborator. And I'm going to take this and turn it into some, we don't need the actual 3D bits anymore. We don't need to know what's going in and out of the screen. We're just going to stay with 2D for a moment. We also want to test visual capacity, not verbal. So we don't want people remembering these little letters. So I'm going to replace the letters with colors. And now I'm going to ask you to remember this pattern. Ready? I'm going to take it away. I'm going to put it back. Did I swap any of those colors? Did I change any of them? And your answer should be no. It's still green, orange, purple, blue. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to take it away and I'm going to put it back. And then you should say, no, you messed with me, you swapped these two. Okay, cool. So this is actually surprisingly hard. When you give people that exact task, they don't do it perfectly. It's really, really tough. Your capacity for how many colors you can map to a given location is like 2 to 3 maximum. So this is, and the 3 is for the really pro subjects. Nobody is perfect on this when there's 4 things to find. Let me give you another task now. I'm going to ask you to rotate this thing. So you could maybe get 2 or 3 of these bindings between the colors and the locations when it was static. But now I'm going to ask you to rotate this thing 90 degrees. And here we go. Here's the object you're going to use. And I'm going to take it away and you're going to rotate it 90 degrees. Ready? Go. Is that the same? Is that what you should have seen? Maybe. Yes, so that's the same. And if you were confident, that's because you cheated and you said red, orange, green, blue, like I did with your verbal system. Don't do that. So make yourself, we're going to do it again, but sing something in your head or, say the alphabet or count to 5 or give yourself a verbal load. Ready? Whoops, let me put it back. Hey. Okay, here goes. And same deal, rotate it 90 degrees, but give yourself a secondary verbal load. Is that the same? Well, if you're like our participants in this, you have no idea. This is super, super hard. Mental rotation capacity for these kinds of objects where you have no long-term memory to help you, just an arbitrary bunch of color mappings is incredibly difficult. In fact, for rotation like this, the capacity estimate you get from experiments like this is you get 1. You get 1 binding. You can remember where one of the colors was and the rest of the colors just completely fall off. Which one? Which one, you ask? Well, it turns out that people tend to go for the top. People tend to focus on the top because the top is just a really important part of an object. And in particular, when you're thinking about rotation, it turns out to be particularly salient part of an object. Why is it that in PowerPoint, when you rotate a shape, that the little handle for rotating it is on the top. Why not put it on the left or the right or the bottom? It's always on the top. In fact, when you look on the PowerPoint menu, it says rotate left or right. Rotate left is only counterclockwise if the thing you are rotating is on the top. If it's on the bottom, then actually you're rotating it to the right in that case. Here's an easier one. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty. If you're a native English speaker, then you probably heard this. This helps you remember which way to turn a screw. Lefty-loosey, righty-tighty only makes sense if the wrench is on the top. If the wrench is on the bottom, it's lefty-tighty, righty-loosey. So there's an implicit assumption whenever you're doing rotation that the main thing that you're rotating is on the top, which in the natural world makes sense. You know, heads are on the top, you touch objects on the top. I'm sure there's a good correlational reason with life experience why that's true. And Lucy, the student who pioneered all this research, was put people in the eye tracker with even simple stimuli and said, rotate this left and rotate it right. And look what people do. They tend to, when they say, rotate this left, okay. And they go up here and they kind of track this one thing to the left. And if you say, rotate it clockwise, they go up here. You never say, go to the right, go to the left. You just say clockwise. And they go to 12 and they go 1, 2, 3. This is just a natural thing that they do. And so the idea here is that if you're only doing one, then, I bet they're getting that purple one because it's on the top. I bet they're just locking onto one thing and they're remembering that one position and they're saying purple, 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 purple in their head, and they're doing something like this. And if that's true, then if we do a post hoc look at the data, then if you happen to swap the purple with the orange or the purple with the blue, you should be pretty good. And you know what? People are. You're at 80%. But if you happen to swap the orange and the green or the green and the blue, you should stink because you didn't encode that one, right? And that's exactly what happens. You're a chance here in these data. You don't, this is the way to trick people on a mental rotation, is to swap the things that they're not actually paying attention to. So for mental rotation, what seems to be happening is that people will pick one bit of an object and they'll track it and the rest of the features just fall off. Your view of the world is fundamentally retinotopic. It's fundamentally this rectangle. And if you want to take bits of the world and move them around and rotate things around, the visual system's just not built for that. It's not good at it. And you can do that for maybe one, maybe two, sometimes things at a time. You can take a feature and drag it around in your imagination, but it's very, very difficult. That's why I actually started with these ice creams. Because if you'll notice, I don't know if you noticed this before, but I'm going to have them spin and the blue and the green flip places twice. And I don't know if you noticed that before, but I did a little bit of a trick where I focused you on the other one. So I'll play it one more time. The blue and the green flip places there, and then I think again, maybe here. There you go. They flip places twice, but you don't notice because your visual system's terrible at maintaining identities that move over time. So have a whole research project together with Mary Haggerty and Mike Stife on how this impacts learning in organic chemistry classrooms. And the quick summary of the work we've done over the last 4 years is don't try to rotate everything. Nobody has the raw capacity to take a bunch of arbitrary atomic identities and then change and then rotate them. You have to rely on verbal coding, that cheating that I kept you from doing before. Long-term memory representations. Clearly, a chemist is not rotating a bunch of arbitrary things. They have a whole vast long-term memory structure of that helps them, fill in the blanks of all the missing the information that their raw capacity can't handle. They leverage redundancy and symmetry. So when you have a molecule like this, you don't look at this and say green, blue, purple, blue. You notice that it's blue, and then you fold it on the symmetry plane, which I think folks in this room are probably familiar with. But then when you actually rotate it, you're doing something like, I'm remembering this bit, that was blue, and this goes around like this, and then you repaint. And you say, this was green, I remember the symmetry plane, and I remember that. You're not actually rotating the whole thing. You're rotating a bit of a skeleton, and then you're repainting from there based on other knowledge that you use to buffer. That's structural change. Object continuity. If you see an animation on a website, in a classroom, then following the objects that move with your attention is going to tell you in your brain that they're the same over space and time. Here's a simple example. This was, reading a book to my kids like 10 years ago. I saw this nice animation. You flip this thing up and down. Look at the baby. The pink baby goes left and right. And look at the butterfly. The butterfly goes up and down. So how do you see those things as the same in space and time? It's really actually kind of hard to do them both at once. It feels like you can only do one at a time. Here's the experiment we developed in the lab to test this. We had a display where you can see this display moving in one of two ways. You can either see the lights. This is probably what you see as a default now. You see the lights moving up and down. Okay, traffic lights are doing this, right? But you can cause yourself to see it in a different way. You can see the yellow flipping left and right. So see the yellow this way is flipping to the, so you can actually cause yourself to see the yellow flip left and right. And the idea is that the way that you do this is you are actually moving your attention this, like this, like this, like this, and that's what causes you to see the yellow as moving left and right. So just track the yellow with your eyes. That if you haven't seen it yet, just go like this with your eyes and track the yellow, and you should see it moving left and right. So we trained people in the lab to see this either direction. We didn't say move your eyes, we didn't say move your attention, and then we wanted to know if you're seeing the yellow go like this. In those trials, are you moving your attention like this? And then if you see it in the control trials moving up and down, your attention better not be moving. So here's the trials where you get the left-right percept, where we're not going to have people move their eyes. We're going to use that same electrophysiological component, so we can track attention left and right, even when the eyes are static. And you find that people move their attention left and right in tune, exactly in tune with the yellow light. Boom, boom, left and right. It takes you, you don't get it here because it takes you a second to figure out what you're doing, and then left, right, left, right. Now, same display, different instruction, see it with the lights moving up and down. In this case, you don't get that signal. So this disappears. It's significantly there on the right, not significant significant there on the left, not on the right, and significantly different between the two of them. So it seems to be really, moving this attentional spotlight seems to be closely tied to seeing the object be the same over space and time. And critically, just like in that molecular rotation experiment, we think that you can only really do this for one thing at a time. This is a very limited capacity process. So if you have a diagram that has multiple things moving, and you want people to be able to track those things and understand those things. Here's some examples just from the internet. You've got a complicated diagram on the left. There's too many things happening here in a given moment. Your visual system cannot handle seeing the important aspects of the motion and what's moving where and what's the same over time for more than one thing at once. So if you have too much going on at once in an animated diagram, it's going to be overwhelming. Likewise, on this engine on the right, I don't know about you, but this takes me a long time to unpack because we got things moving in the intake and the exhaust, and then there's a firing thing, and then there's too much happening. So there's plenty of work out there showing that diagrams that are animated can be unexpectedly just confusing. Lots of work from folks like Mary Hagerty and Barbara Tversky that show that diagrams can be overwhelming, and there may be an argument for sequentializing these things, for making sure that people are paying attention to the right thing at the right time. This is also an issue in data visualization. You've got animated data visualizations like the ones on the top and the bottom. On the bottom, we're taking data values and we're rearranging them, and we're trying to get people to see that those values are the same over space and time. And you kind of get that the values are the same, but you can't actually track the values and know which ones went where. On the top, why is this little kid's face melting? You've got a user interface where the pixels are organized in space, and then you want to reorganize those pixels according to color space. So you want to make a hue histogram out of those same pixels. And the authors of this piece of software wanted to use an animation to show that they are the same pixels, but it's just confusing. You look at it, and now you can see it. Okay, the blue eyes go to the right, the kid's face goes to the left, but it's super confusing to new viewers, and they want to know, how do we set this up in a way, and sequentializing it actually does help, where people can understand this animated transition. So we got a whole new project in the lab on this. How do we come up with a bunch of rules for how animated data visualizations and diagrams can be comprehensible to people? How can we make sure that we don't overwhelm perceptual capacity here? Actually, David, you don't even know this yet, but thank you to all the Silk folks, Nora, David, et cetera, because a co-PI for the grant on this is going to be Camelia Matuk, who was a PhD student here, who I never would have even known what she did unless it was through Silk. I had to go to Philadelphia to go find out what it is that she worked on. So if we knew that we would get this grant, I would not be able to say anything. But anyway, this is a grant that I would hope that we would get together. And it's going to be across on the education side and diagrams, but also data visualizations. And to give you a spirit of what it would be about, on the bottom, there's a little bit of a flip book. I'm super proud of the labbies who came up with a way of getting an animation into a grant proposal. So there's actually a flip book where if you flip through in a PDF, you can see these animations moving on the bottom. They were so clever about it. And you can see on the left, look at that. Boop, boop. You see that on the lower left, the yellow becomes red. You can handle that. Things expand, you got it. Look at the ones on the lower right. Boop, boop. Boop, boop. I don't know about you. I can't tell anything from those, right? These are actually from the New York Times and other media outlets where you're supposed to see how these two clouds of objects transition, and it's just chaotic. It looks pretty, it's engaging, but just like a lot of the other animation literature shows, it's really tough to parse it. So that's object continuity. Again, there's this argument for having a strong capacity limit because we're relying on this attentional priority map, and it can really only handle in some situations one feature or one location at a time. Last topic is going to be spatial relationships. How do I know that this red thing is to the right of this carbon? What's the actual mechanism here? In the vision literature, there's actually not much work. The only, the main work that I've known about is from folks like John Hummel and Irv Biederman back in the early 90s, but very few people attack this question. I think it's super important in the vision literature. So how do I know that this red thing is to the right of this black thing? Well, we do know from the vision literature, this is hard. That if I ask you to do this, it takes you a second. So the typical displays that are used to show this are going to be visual search displays. Typically, they're going to look like this. And I'm going to ask you, in this case, which one of these is not like the others? And you're going to find that this is really hard. So where are the ones where the relationship is flipped? I don't even know. Are there even in here? I hope so. Here, this one and this one. That was super hard. So we do know from the vision literature that this is capacity limited and slow. And by the way, it's not because you can't see the color properly, because that was easy, right? Just picking out the one blue thing. It's the relation per se. So people have done all the right controls to show that it's the relation per se. So in a diagram like this, how am I getting the relations of the whole molecule? That's too hard. How am I even getting the relations for just the black and the red? How am I just getting that one relation out of my visual system? I'm not going to go through all the detail, but we have a paper back from 2012 that reviews all the ways you could do this. You got this relation you want to get. Well, you could have a template. You could have a half template. Your brain could vibrate at 40 hertz. You could have Zenon-Polishin finsts where, don't even worry about that one. I can't even explain how that would work. Or you have another set of mechanisms where you move your attention around. I'm not going to go into the details of these. And also a huge hat tip to these folks who've done a lot of the pioneering work again. And their model is your brain vibrates at 40 hertz. Ask me later if you want the details model. The one that I want to propose is you're moving your attention around. And that's the way that you get relations out of the world, out of spatial relations. That you pay attention to the red and the black, and you know that red and black are there, but you don't know if it's black, red, or red, black. You don't know at this perceptual moment. You have to move your attention to the right and say, I'm looking at the red thing now. I just moved to the right, so the red thing must be on the right. And that's how you know that the red thing is on the right. I mentioned that Irv Biederman, along with John Hummel, a couple of my heroes in this literature. I saw Irv Biederman at a conference, and I talked to him. I told him about this potential mechanism. I was so excited, and he said, "Oh, that's clever." But the problem with that is they only know that the red is on the right. You don't actually know that the black one is on the left. That would take like a second movement. And I got so sad because, oh no, it doesn't work. And I went like crying back to my hotel room, cried myself to sleep. Woke up the next morning though, and I was super happy because I actually like that. I like that it's a falsifiable aspect of this proposal, right? It's elegant that you only get half. You actually have to move your attention back to the other one to know that it's on the left. So it took a little bit of crying, but by the next morning I was ready to go. And then he said, "Okay, Steve, that's fine. I agree. That's a plausible mechanism." And then maybe you move your attention over to the left, and you'll pay attention to this group, and you'll know that there's black atoms and then blue atoms, but you won't know the internal structure of that little clump until you actually do more micro attentional movements within it. So you only know that there's that cluster of stuff on that side. And so you're moving your attention around to be able to pull relations out from the world. And there's other models that do something really similar. Here's some work recently from Linda Smith's lab. First author there is Lei Yuan, who was a grad student with David and Dedrick Gettner and I here at Northwestern before she moved on to her postdoc there. Don't worry about all the stuff on the top. All I want you to see is that they're trying to figure out how little kids learn multi-digit numbers. And a multi-digit number is an arbitrary spatial relation. You cannot have a template in your head for 124 and 142 and 421, right? You have to be able to understand these things flexibly and compositionally. And their proposal for how this works is really similar, where you're moving and you're moving your attention around. That's what this little red oval, the gray oval is doing in that diagram at the bottom. It's your attention moving around, recognizing one object at a time, and then knowing from the movements of the circle which digit you're currently recognizing. So other models out there have a similar flavor to needing to move your attention around to be able to flexibly recognize spatial structure in the world. And in this, we've done a lot of work in the lab trying to show that when you pull spatial relations out of the world, you want to know whether you're seeing this or you're seeing this, you move your eyes around, or if you force people to keep their eyes fixed, we use that electrophysiology component to show that they still secretly move their attention around to be able to pull out these relations. So here's one sample study. I could show you lots where you want to know what's the relation between the blue and the orange here, and you can see people moving their attention around. Even though we even tried to keep their attention at the center, we had this degraded letter that's really hard to see, and so we tried to keep your attention at the center, and people still want to cheat and move their attention over. Here's just another example from another paper. You want to tell is the plus to the right of the X, and same deal, here's your attention moving to this one and then to this one. I was working on this way back in 2010, 2012, and I saw David in the hall. And I said, David, look at this, I'm thinking about relations. He said, oh, you want to get away from those little circles and colors. All the cool people are researching graphs. You want to get into the education side. And so we talked about it and we applied for a grant, and I think we got on the second try, where we started looking at exactly the kinds of things that David mentioned in the intro, where we want to know how are students pulling relations from graphs like this, and with eye tracking, like how are they moving their eyes around? Or can we help them move their eyes around better if this model's right? So just to give you a flavor of the kinds of experiments we do in that line, you're looking at this graph, and when you look at this, I'm going to claim that you cannot actually tell whether you're seeing big, small, or small, big, decreasing trend or increasing trend without moving your eyes or your attention back and forth. If you pay attention to this thing holistically, you actually don't know the answer. And I'm going to claim that if you put this in front of somebody, they're going to systematically move their eyes around to the left, to the right, to the big one, to the small one. We don't know. There's going to be some strategy. And then you're going to say, congrats, Steve, you're going to put people in an eye tracker and they're going to move their eyes around. And that's supposed to support this idea. They're going to move their eyes around no matter what. Okay, we need a control condition. Same display, but give them a different task and show that they don't move their eyes around. So that task wound up being, are these two items the same or different? Are they the same or different heights? Who cares if it's this or this? All you have to do is to pull both in parallel, and long story short, your visual system is really good at this, and note whether the two objects have the same or different sizes. You should not need to move your eyes or attention around to be able to do this. So you give people this task, and I'm going to take the data and fold it again. So we have the data as taller, shorter. So shorter, taller, and taller, shorter displays. I'm going to take them, I'm going to fold them so that we're looking at looks toward the tall or looks toward the short. And this is people's eye position on average in the same different control condition. So they keep their eyes at the center. They don't move their eyes very much. I'm going to just expand these out vertically just so you can see them a little bit better. Because now I'm going to add the data for the relation condition. Now, same displays. Are you looking at small, big, or big, small? Suddenly, people's eye movements start going systematically towards the tall or towards the short. And these are within subject comparisons. Every barbell is a person. Let me pop these down to make a little histogram so you can see the distribution a little bit better. You can see in the same different control, people keep their eyes in the middle. But as soon as you ask for one of these directional relations, like is it tall, short, or short, tall, people start suddenly moving their eyes back and forth. You might be saying, oh, I can cheat though. I don't need to think of this as tall, short, or short, tall. I can kind of imagine that this is a house with a roof that's sloped this way or a roof that's sloped that way. There's an alternative route for me to answer this question. And you're right. If we tell participants to think of the task like that, exactly the same response. Is it tall, short, or short, tall? But if we tell them to think about it as this or this, now suddenly you don't need to actually move your eyes around anymore and look at the black dots. We just changed the keys, the labels on the keys to be slope this way or slope that way, and the black dots now go to the center. People don't move their eyes around anymore. So there's multiple routes to getting the spatial relationship. You can either individuate these objects and find out tall, short, or big, tall, or you can look at sort of the global shape, and you can get the envelope of that and make a shape judgment on it. And there are two routes to getting the same answer in the end. Oh, remember when I saw Irv Biederman at that conference, and I was initially very tearful that you only get one side of relation at once, you only get red right or black left, and that made me very sad. But then I got happy because I thought about how it's the same in language. In language, when you linguistically describe a relationship, it's asymmetric in a similar way. It feels really different to say, after a schoolyard experiment, that the temperature is hotter in the sun than to say that it's cooler in the shade. Those are linguistically really different. And there's lots of work on the linguistic descriptions of relations in general to show that this is true, even for relationships that should be symmetric, like met. If I said, hey, I was at a party last weekend and I met Kamala Harris, Vice President of the United States, you say, good for you, that's amazing. But if I said, I was at a party last weekend and Kamala Harris got to meet me, you'd say you're kind of a jerk. So even though in theory these are symmetric relations, there's something asymmetric, even in a symmetric relation like that. And that same thing carries over to hotter in the sun versus cooler in the shade. Lots of examples also of how these kinds of asymmetries can be reflected in the way that we move attention around as well. Some great work from the 70s from Clark and Chase, where if you ask people, is B under A or is A over B, you're faster to respond that A is over B. And I think that's because you have this natural proclivity to pay attention to the top, which should give you visually the conclusion that A is on top, and it should take you a little longer to pop down and figure out that B is on the bottom. You have scene perception. The way that you move your attention around matters. Gleitman et al. Found that when you do a little subtle flicker and draw people's attention to the dog and you say, what's going on here? They said the dog's chasing that guy. And when you do the same thing over here, they say that guy's running from that dog. So there's already this connection between these asymmetries of the way that you move your attention around and the way that you describe things with language. So we did a bunch of experiments where we wanted to see whether when kids looked at graphs, let's throw this kid in the eye tracker and let's ask them a question like, is blueberry, are there more blueberries than limes? Are they going to move their attention around in sort of the right order? Are they going to move their attention around to the blue and then the yellow, or the yellow and then the blue?
Are there more blueberries than pears?
It's not a real participant. That's my daughter. She's twice as big now. This was a while ago, but I just thought the video was cute. So let me put you in the subject's chair. You ready? Are there fewer bananas than blueberries? Yes. Are there more limes than blueberries? No. You can feel that if you have to answer no to any question, there's like a polarity thing that it's harder. It just adds 200 milliseconds to any response, but you can partial that out. It's a main effect. All right, let me give you the anecdotal version of the data. Are there more blueberries than oranges? What you should do here is you should move your eyes to the blueberries to notice whether or not that is bigger. You shouldn't move it to the left. But what little kids do is they just instinctively move to the left. They always go to the left and right because they're learning reading. And so they just do reading order for everything. But that's incongruent. It doesn't produce the visual representation that you need to be congruent with the language representation. So here's a slow 8-year-old. This kid's going to be slow. Let's see what they're going to do. Go ahead, move to the blueberry first. Oh, they move left first instinctively. Okay, so little kids will often do left to right order no matter what the question is. All right, here's a fast 8-year-old, more anecdotal data. And in this case, they should go to the orange first. So they should go to the right. They should inhibit that reflex to want to start on the left side. And good job. Okay, they went to the right first. So your eyes should follow the bouncing ball of language to some degree. These are the anecdotal versions of the data. Just for time's sake, I don't know that I'll have time to show you the actual data. it exists. It looked like this. I'm happy to come back to this in the Q&A if we have time, but I want to make sure that that we have time to talk about one other thing. So if you want to see the actual data that support that cherry-picked anecdotal fake data that I just gave you, just let me know later. Think that the way that you move your attention around in visualizations like this is going to produce different percepts. If you look at these bars individually, you'll notice that Sydney's very warm in January. Interesting, interesting, interesting. But you have to learn to do some gymnastics with your visual system to be able to pull out arbitrary relations of other types, like main effects. Hey, I'd rather live in Sydney than Chicago. Look at that. It's much warmer in Sydney compared to Chicago. And there's more of a seasonality difference in January than in July, and I'd rather live in Sydney in January, etc., than in July. And there's an interaction here that's the single most important part of this graph, where you want to see that because Sydney and Chicago are in different hemispheres, north-south wise, that the seasons are reversed relative to each other. So there's a ton of perceptual gymnastics you have to be able to do to figure this out. This is a summary for spatial relationships. Relations are asymmetric in language, and I want to claim that could be true in perception as well. If the way that you pull spatial relationships out from maps, graphs, and diagrams, or just the real world, if I hold up any two objects, then is that you're moving your attention around, that should produce a similarly asymmetric relation. It should matter which object you go to first. And we have some data from showing that little kids don't do this right. They start left and they go to right, but college kids follow the bouncing ball of language, producing visual and linguistic representations that should be congruent. And that coordination develops over time. This is the data that I didn't show you. And this kind of coordination between language and vision to be able to pull out relations, don't worry about understanding all this. I just want to say that other people have models that work in similar ways. If you go to the dynamic fields, deep neural network crowd, just look at those little bumps on those heat maps. Those are little attentional spotlights doing similar things, is all you need to pull from this. If you go to the artificial intelligence literature, where people are trying to build computer vision systems that are built on deep neural networks that are supposed to see the world in similar ways that we do, and they're trying to compare sentences with scenes, just look at the little heat. All you have to do is look at the heat in the picture. The heat is following the sentence in the same way as we just discussed in those other experiments. So you're following the bouncing ball of language with your attention, and that's the way that these really different kinds of representations coordinate with each other. So to summarize, attentional priority map, I want to rename it. The attentional priority, attentional signal to noise booster, yeah, that's what it's done for us in the past. But now in our artificial worlds, our worlds of maps, graphs, and diagrams, I want to call it the attentional priority and structure map. I want to argue that it's a system that we've adapted that is initially meant to just give us a signal to noise boost, but attending to certain colors in the world makes them pop out and allows you to analyze the spatial layout, spatial structure of just those colors, and makes them feel like they're grouped. That when you see an object and you think of it as being right side up or upside down, one way that you can help control that process potentially is by attending to one bit of that object, and that can serve as a bit of a control mechanism for whatever else in our brains is letting us see things with different reference frames. It's at minimum serving as a control mechanism to help us shove ourselves into the different percept. If we rentally rotate an object, we seem to pick out one spot of it, and then we say that's the red thing, and we're able to maintain that feature in that one relative location of the object. The rest of it just dissolves in most cases, at least if it's arbitrary structure. If it's known structure, you're a chemist, it doesn't. But if you're a newbie to this, then it dissolves. But picking out that one spot seems to be critical to engaging in mental rotation of arbitrary structures. If you see an animation and then things are moving around, like on the lower left of the screen right now, following a single object with your attention seems to make you realize that it's the same over space and time. Once you do that for 2-3 objects at once, you start to lose that correspondence and animated diagrams become chaotic. On the lower right, spatial relationships. I want to argue that the way that we pull spatial relationships out of arbitrary displays, like that molecule is for me, is to move your attention around and say, I just move my attention to the right, and I'm on the red thing, and therefore the red thing might be on the right. That could be a way that we could pull out these spatial relationships. But again, all of these processes are really capacity limited. You get one color at a time in the upper left. You get to attend to one place or follow one object on the upper right. Object continuity, you can follow one thing at a time. Spatial relations, you can pull out one at a time. They're incredibly capacity limited. And I like this line of work, and I'm trying to evangelize other folks in vision to get interested in how we do these sorts of things, because of the opportunity to improve design and pedagogy. The more that we understand how these really capacity limited systems work, the more that we can set up displays that work better for everybody and teach people to move their attentional spotlights around in the right way. Just want to end with a brief caveat that I'm not saying this structure map is used for everything. This is not like, the main reason why the visual system exists. When you have scene recognition and you look at this photo and you say people in front of a building and sitting on a lawn with backpacks, you did not need a structured map to do that. You have a bunch of statistics and bags of features and object recognition and templates that let you do that within 125 milliseconds. You did not need to move your attention around. When you recognize that that kind of looks like a street or that kind of looks like a beach, you have a template that helps you do that. When you recognize a face or an object, there are constellations of high-level feature detectors that all shout at once, but you can make sense of that chaos because you have such vast experience with these kinds of objects. You don't need anything like the structure map. But I think you do need it when you need to construct or manipulate or communicate in these sorts of arbitrary, flexible, artificial worlds, maps, graphs, diagrams, molecules, etc. When you need categorical relations to know that the big thing's on the left of the right of the purple thing, you need to have some mechanism that lets you explicitly pull out those kinds of that kind of structure. And particularly when you have linguistic descriptions that you want to make, you want to be able to have a representation that can be exported to language, like the female octopus is on the left of the male. In order to do that, I'm saying you have to move your attention around to be able to produce a visual representation that can generate that sort of sentence. One last nod to the AI literature, which I'm increasingly tracking as sort of a computer science affiliation now, and I'm getting interested in how these folks are solving these same problems because they're using, again, deep neural networks that are supposed to mimic the way that our brains work. Don't worry about all the stuff on the top. This is a deep neural network. That's the crazy circuit diagram that, don't ask me how it works either, that understands a graph. You can ask the system questions about that graph and it'll answer them using a model that smells like the human visual system. And I love the figure 2 from this wonderful paper that says, in an image, it's actually kind of easy. You can recognize that there's people and there's skateboarders and there's bikes and there's trees. The visual system, human visual system, is just built for that. And you can have all these complex feature detectors screaming at once, and that works. But on the right, this is really different. This is a different problem to the computer scientist who's designing this network, because bar charts convey information using, let's see, here's the important part. Even small changes can completely alter the information in this chart. Knowing the histogram of what colors are out there, knowing the histogram of the sizes of the bars is not going to let you answer questions about these data. You have to be able to pick out individual values, individual relations, and even slight changes to the heights of these things or to the positions of these things are going to mean a world of difference, as opposed to on the left where you can have a bag of features, you can have a system that just takes it all in at once and you'll get by. So there's a really different way of thinking in these two worlds. And I'd say the one on the right is the structure map world. That's the one that I'm interested in working in. Summary slide that will be up for questions. Similarity grouping, there was the examples we gave. Structural change, those are the examples that we gave. Object continuity, there's the melting child and the traffic lights. And then spatial relations, this was the, if you flicker, depending on where you flicker, you'll see, describe this one way or the other. This is our Sydney-Chicago temperature. And then this is our eye movement map. I'm just gonna leave this up in a minute to spur questions. I will want to thank everybody in the lab, particularly Audrey Michael, who did a lot of the eye tracking work that you saw, Miriam Novak, who worked on a lot of the eye tracking work with kids, a couple other people that are not Leguan as well, who worked with Miriam on that project, and all the folks who funded the work. And I will leave this up to spur questions. Thanks.
Real handsome. Okay, thank you very much, Steve. It was fascinating. And If you have questions, just type in the chat that you have a question, because trying to keep track of the hand raising and the chat, I now know why it exceeds my visual attentional capacity. So just put in the chat that you have a question, and I'll recognize you. Don't all do it at once. What is, okay. Okay, so that's a very reduced version. I think Sarah has a question, or she doesn't understand the instructions. But let's say she has a question.
I could start to answer Ina's question. If,
Sure.
Give me a second to read it. Oh, no, Sarah. Oh, Sarah. Yeah, go ahead.
Go ahead to Anna's first comment first, and I can. It means I have a question. I'm just, being visual here.
Yes, yes, it's very symbolic. Yes. Go ahead. You may now ask your question, Sarah.
Oh, okay. But maybe Stephen needs time to read first, right?
Oh, go ahead, Sarah. I'll get to that one when we have a lull. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm of course fascinated, and thank you very much, Stephen. This is fabulous. As a cartographer, we have this 5,000-year history of putting things in a spatial structure, and now we know why certain of these rules that we have work. And in fact, it's amazing that, there's this person called Jacques Bertin who in 1967 published a book without a single reference to tell us how actually we need to add color, orientation, all these things on the page to make maps. But, and he didn't know anything about what you've done, and so it's amazing, and it seems to actually work. It seems to what you're saying is matching that. So my question is this: I mean, and it relates to I'm speaking as a cartographer where the geographic structure is given. I cannot change it, so it's different from information visualization, where I have much more choice. So in this case, there's a constraint of the structure, and it's meaningful because it's the world, it's geography. And so we have the retinal variables available. We can change the color, we can change the size maybe, but the relationships often are given. So in the sense, when, and I think the comment was made by an architect, Ruth, she said, oh, well, I'm just collapsing, make out of 4 colors, I'm just making 2. Like the bluish ones and the reddish ones, or the warm colors and the cold colors. So I'm able to impose semantics, meaningful structure, as you said earlier with the picture, people in front of the lawn, right? All the MIT work, we know about how the world works. So if we have experience, the sky is up there and it's blue. And so I wanted to ask you about these, this what works for the attentional literature, or the attentional information that we gain from these lab experiments, how we transfer. And David was saying, well, don't look at blobs, look at graphs. And then I say, well, but our maps are much more complex. So for example, if I say map the sunshine hours in Santa Barbara, right, I could use color hue, and now the question is it more color or darker color should be because it's more and more stuff on the page, or it's brighter color because it's the sun? So we have to make these choices because of the things that are existing in the real world, and they get transferred. So your map there, whatever it is, it's a terrible map. It gets published, but it's terrible from a cartographic standpoint. It makes all these other mistakes that are related to the cartographic geographic theory. So I have comments and I have questions. How do this translates what you tell us into a complex domain like cartography, aside from saying, oh, make things, salient, or make them structurally similar or whatever. It's really sort of a question of translate your results into my world.
Yeah, no, great question. So there's, I'd say that there's going to be perceptual limitations on what people can handle. And I think if I'm understanding your question correctly, there's a couple of levels above that where if people can only focus on one thing at a time, you need to consider which one they should focus on at a given moment. Now, if you're an expert, then that's not an issue. You're going to pop through in a well-practiced routine. If anybody in this room sees a 2x2 bar graph, they're going to pop through and they're going to say main effect, interaction, because we're all well experienced there. If you're a cartographer, then you're going to pop through the colors or the spatial arrangements of the marks, the glyphs on the map in the appropriate order. How do we set that up for somebody who is new to this situation? Well, now you have to think about salience, and they're going to go for this one first and that one second, careful annotation and guidance so that we help them go explicitly instruct them how to go through in the right order. And then you also brought up the semantic considerations of how you have a certain color that typically is associated with a typical polarity on a scale or with a typical legend entry, etc. And there's lots of work on that. There's the data viz world is doing a great job of this these days, where they have these automated algorithms that where if you want to be able to have the right legend color for bananas and oranges and strawberries, it'll go and scrape Google Images and find out the perfect color that represents banana. You know, that's sort of an easy one because you could have figured it out for yourself. But what if you have more complex categories? It'll go figure out the right semantics just in those automated ways. And then if you want for the polarity point, if you want to know, is this color big or small on the scale? Karen Schloss at UW-Madison is doing a lot of great work these days, showing that there are some perceptual rules that are actually work pretty well. I'm trying to see whether I can pull up her demo fast enough. Some perceptual rules that can quickly serve as a heuristic for which end will look like it's up. It's not pulling up at the moment, but the quick version is typically the darker thing looks like it's bigger, but it's actually the higher contrast thing looks like it's bigger, whatever color you have, but it's actually the more opaque thing, because it depends on what your background color is. So if I pull up, I'll try to pull up a slide later and I can show you. It's a really elegant result, but there's rules like that have come up as well. So you're raising a really important question that is not just the raw perceptual bit. It's going to be how do you change that process over time? How do you weave through that routine? How do you guide people new to it to do it right? And then how do you link to the right conceptual links to, okay, I just did this routine, but what does it mean? So these are all important additional stages. And I'm typically working at this one, but like to be tested on the higher ones frequently.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Okay, Nora, Ruth, and then Sabine. Sabina. Nora?
Nora, I think you're unmuted, but we're not getting your sound. I think maybe your audio devices.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so that was fun. Thank you. Is there such a thing as visual expertise? You kind of emphasize the design of the graph or whatever, but then occasionally you allude to how chemists really get the structure, how Mike Stife shudders when you break the bonds. We've had geoscientists tell us that on utterly flat topo maps without any shading, things pop out and they see it in 3D. Is there such a thing?
Oh, sure. Well, so there's expertise.
Well, then how do we foster it is the next question. Is there education for that?
Yeah, so there's certainly the expertise of the routine that you go through and what things you prioritize over time. But I think that's different from what you're bringing up, which is more of a pure perceptual learning where you actually see things differently. And that, of course, links to the perceptual expertise literature in general. A radiologist is going to look at an X-ray fundamentally differently than I am. A pilot is going to look at a flight deck fundamentally different than I am. A chemist is going to see molecular structure fundamentally different than I am because they've learned those spaces, what the important differences are, what are the things that they can ignore, et cetera. In these cases, I'd be curious to know what folks in the room think of the kind of work that Phil Kelman does, where he just slams you with tons of examples until your lizard brain starts to appreciate the important features in those spaces. You know, this is something that we've tinkered with in this chemistry work, and Phil Kelman certainly has as well, where you can't have the concept until you have the right percept. And the way that Kelman does it is just to, you know, just flash these things, and there's more sophisticated versions of that. But I'm certainly I'm open to that possibility of you needing to train your perceptual system to see things in the right way, weigh features that are diagnostic heavily, start to downweight things that are not. And that's something that's hard to teach explicitly, and just the flashing things at you in a systematic way and training people like rats. Go ahead, train me like a rat in that case. I think that's what I need. And think of the work that happens in the concepts and categories literature where you have greebles or aliens. You just have to learn a category distinction, and you can't even verbalize it. It's just a smell like greeble A or greeble B. I would think that some sort of learning like that is also going to be critical. And there's certainly people that know more than I about how to do that the right way, how to get people most effectively to see those different categories.
Okay, we'll go to Sabina, and then if there's time, Ina's is kind of a more of a comment, but you can. So let's start with Sabina.
Yeah. Hi, Stephen. Thanks very much for the talk. Very interesting. And I had the same question as Sarah as well for cartographer. What the hell can you do? But we also kind of bound to the 2D world. And that I think was something that I saw in your representation as well. You were mostly working with 2D representations, although some of them were supposedly like the structure of the molecule is something that is actually existing in a 3D space. So I was wondering if putting it into a 3D space would help. And your example with the picture, actually, the difference for me between the picture and the bar chart is that the picture is something where I do have depth cues, and I have a certain amount of experience that I'm able to tell what these different blobs that I'm seeing there are, whereas the depth cues that I'm getting from a bar chart are not really helpful for understanding what's going on there. So I was wondering if instead of having a 2D bar chart, you would have a 3D bar chart. Would that actually help with, figuring out relationships?
Yeah, no, great question. So first of all, in the natural world, a lot of 3D is a giant pile of hacks. Binocular disparity doesn't buy you much. And when we're seeing things in 3D, it's mostly like vertical position and parallax cues and perspective, et cetera. But you still can extract clearly some 3D from it. But the visual system is generally really bad at doing anything with that 3D outside of the sort of, there's certainly a world of moving around in the environment and you're getting more hippocampal, more navigation, and that gets into worlds that I know less about and have enjoyed learning about through this conference. But when you get to displays, 2D screens, and you try to add 3D, like you try to make that graph 3D, people are just garbage at it. There's tons of work. And when VR started up in the 90s, everybody tried to make 3D visualizations, and they just don't work. People are really bad at it. And it's starting up again now that augmented reality is a thing, and everybody wants to look at the graph through their phone and be able to manipulate it. Now that you're able to manipulate it, some of the motor component comes back in, and it's more like a 3D world where you're moving, and it's not just a static 3D thing on the screen. And so that may make a difference. But in general, 3D at the moment doesn't seem to work well for these tasks. And for something like the chemical molecule, clearly thinking in 3D is important. And I think there's some motor component to that where you're lighting up the motor system, and that's helping give you additional firepower on the 3D element. But I also think there's a whole bunch of little 2D hacks, just like in the real world, how vertical height or parallax or whatever helps you, where I had long chats with Mike Stife about this, of like, when you rotate a molecule in this plane, how do you do that? And I think that what he's really doing is if it's in the front and you're rotating it clockwise, then that means the front goes this way and the back goes this way. And there's like dirty tricks like that even chemists don't realize that they're using. And yeah, maybe there's a true, maybe motorically influenced 3D thing that they're doing, but I bet that there's a bunch of dirty hacks like that they're also using, where they're focusing on a given plane at a time, and they've memorized that from the top, clockwise rotation means the front goes to the right, and things like that they don't even realize that they're using. And it's not something that I plan to explore, but it's something we got tempted to at one point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so do you want to take on, is it Aina or Ina's comment? It's in the chat, or I'll let you explain.
It's Ina. Yeah, it's Ina. I typed it in there in case you wanted to ignore it, not deal with it.
No, I don't want to.
I think Ina and I could geek out about the 40 hertz by vibration. I think we could have a side geek out about that. I think the important thing to say for now is that the model that we're mentioning where you get relations by moving your attention around, this is like a, what is that going to be, 4 hertz or 2 hertz, right? It's like you go and you move 2 or 3 times per second and it works out to 2 or 4 hertz. And there are models that work in similar sorts of ways where it's not 2 or 4 hertz, it's 40 hertz. And this is, John Hummel does a lot of this, Keith Holyoke. I argue with them that I don't see much evidence that that's the carrier signal. And I think it's more parsimonious to say that we know that attention is already moving at this slow rate, and slapping some motion detectors on your map, your attention map, could give you the signal that you need. And they have arguments for why the 40 hertz is necessary. And so that's where I enjoy festive conversations with them. I adore those folks. I don't make it, it's really fun. And so I actually don't know which account is right in the end. My job in life is just to push this one.
Right. No, it's an interesting idea. And now that we know better with our methods, I think it's time to really look at that issue and really look at it and scrutinize it. But the other comment that I had was just about complex visualizations too. I put another comment in the chat, and you're probably very familiar with the work of Kati Berner at Indiana University, and she manages to produce books on how to visualize complex information, and it's amazing. It's a real tour de force. And she doesn't have any training in understanding the visual system. She's an engineer, and she intuitively appreciates those important dimensions. That's amazing to me.
Yeah. I know her work well. She's one of my heroes. Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, for the last 5 years, I've been a data viz researcher. I mean, my main conference is the Data Visualization Society. I have an IEEE membership, and I was one of the academic chairs of the Data Viz conference, and so I've spent a lot of time in that world. There's a psychological science in the public interest paper coming out on good guidelines for data visualizations that Nora may know about too, that is impressed, that if you're curious about to hear the Data Viz summary of how it connects to psych, with some spectacular co-authors, 2 of them from that world. That'll be appearing later.
Do you have a preprint that you can share?
I can sneak you one.
In the chat window, a link?
If Nora doesn't, is okay.
Well, there's not an official link, but Steve can send it to you. There's no problem with that. And it should appear by the end of the calendar year. The Association for Psychological Science does a lot of copy editing. Plus, we're still getting some commentaries. But anyway, it'll be out by the end of 2021.
Yeah. If anybody
Brilliant.
wants my last name at Northwestern or Gmail, just drop me a note. I'm happy to send you that.
Thank you. And thank you for a great talk.
Thanks.
Did I miss anybody on the questions? I think we're ending 3 minutes early, which I think is awesome. So, Jurgis, do you want to take back over? Liga?
Well, I think we are approaching the very sad point when the conference is finishing. And before saying a couple of concluding words, thanks a lot to Steve for the absolutely awesome talk. And I mean, it's always, if you are organizing a conference and if you are listening to something that is very close to your own work, that you are literally suffering because you are not able to enjoy it. So I mean, but yeah, I was enjoying, of course. It was absolutely awesome. Well, I wanted to say a couple of concluding final words, and well, dear all, I'm really happy and honored that we managed this conference despite of all constraints and despite of all troubles. As we know, we had to postpone this conference, and then we published a part of papers, and then we postponed posters. This was a logistical disaster, and thanks to David and Nora, we were in charge of the whole program, in charge of deciding of how to proceed and what to do. And of course, well, thanks to steering committee. Yeah, well, it was a very challenging conference and a lot because of uncertainties, and also a great conference. And thanks a lot. Thanks to all presenters, speakers, chairs, and yeah, well, this was really awesome. And let me also thank to poster chairs, Kasia and Liga, and let me also especially warm thanks to our local organizing team. First of all, Liga, who did most of the logistics on site, and to Gunti Salnicans, Kaspar Šikste, Solvitum Braško, Lijana William, Dat Shasta, Jelena Sant, Aisha, and also our volunteers, Janis, Ilse, Laura, Guntis, Ayumi, and Agnes. So I'm really thankful to all of you, and also I think I can say on behalf of all Spatial Cognition 2020-21 participants, this was incredibly hard and successful work. And well, I'm looking forward to seeing you in Riga, because Riga is a physical co-presence event. Riga is a wonderful place, a lovely place, and our lab is physically just 3 minutes from Freedom's Monument. So in short, you're very welcome to come to Riga. We are just around the corner from the very center of the city, and I really hope to see you very soon. I hope the world will return to normality at some point, at some predictable point. And well, that's almost all from my side. There is one important announcement. As you know, this conference is a kind of, I would say, memorial conference to honor Christian Frex, who passed away last year. And we did also rating. We did best poster and paper rating, and thanks to all program committee who's involved in that. And we can announce the best presentation and best poster, Christian Frex presentation, and I'm delighted to say that Alina Tu and Elizabeth Kressel has been awarded as Christian Frex Distinguished Talk Award. And my warmest congratulations to Alina and Liz. That was really awesome. And on behalf of program committee, and also on behalf of our local team, and yeah, well, we of course.
Yeah, I don't see them on, but we'll let them know.
We will also send the certificate, and we will also notify by email and social networks, and we'll do that. So thanks a lot. We are so happy that we managed everything. I think even better than we were expecting at the very beginning. We were very worried that the digital environment would not create a lot of discussions, but it's not the case. This is really nice, and thank you so much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Oh, nobody wants to leave.
Thanks.
Thanks to you, and all the best.
Thanks, Kasia. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Just wanted to say thanks again. This was really fun.
Thank
I'll have the hippocampus now. And I'll see you all next year. I think I'm coming by next summer, in a year from now. I'll get to see Riga finally.